Hi, my name is Jaleesa Hooker-Jones, and I am an instructional specialist with the Office of Professional Development. Today, I'll be going over student learning targets with you guys. It's going to be part one of my series, What Your Teacher Preparation Program Didn't Tell You, that is especially for new teachers in the system and new teachers to the state of Louisiana or EBR. So let's get started. So what is a student learning target? An SLT is a measurable goal for student achievement over a given period of time that reflects an ambitious but reasonable expectation of growth. SLTs are divided into three different sections. You have priority content, rigor, and high quality evidence. Now, priority content focuses on the content that you want to teach. What do you want your students to know? What do you want them to gain from being in your class? All right, you look at that content and decide what you want to teach, how it aligns with state standards, district standards, whatever standards your school has chosen for that specific course. The next area is rigor. How rigorous is it going to be? And at the same time, is it appropriate for your students? Is the amount of rigor that you're using appropriate, and is the goal attainable? So while we still want to make sure your content is rigorous, we want to make sure that the goals are attainable for your students. And lastly, high quality evidence. How are you proving that your students actually learned what you set out for them to learn? So if you have whatever goals you have for them, how are you going to measure what they actually learned from the beginning of your class to the end of your class, whether you're offering them a LEAP 2025 and an end of course testing, or a pre-assessment and post-assessment at the end of the class? How are you going to be able to determine that with these three characteristics? So writing your SLTs. When you look at your SLTs, you're going to use 4 steps to write strong SLTs. Firstly, define the content. What exactly are you going to teach the children? What do they need to learn in an English 3 class? What do they need to learn in pre-K? What do they need to learn in a 4th grade class? All right, what are your goals and what type of content is going to help you reach those goals? Secondly, identify the assessment and collect baseline data. How are you going to measure what those kids need to know by the end of that class? You're going to give them a pre-assessment, or you're going to give them some type of diagnostic test to determine what they need to learn, to include what they need to learn at the end. You give it to them at the beginning, you see where they are coming into your class, and you use that data to drive your instruction for the rest of the year. So identify what type of assessment you're going to use and collect that baseline data through EDMS, DRC, or any other pre-assessment tool, pre and post-assessment tool you find. The third thing, identify the student group. What's going to be your large group? What's going to be your subgroup? Are you going to have more than one subgroups? What type of group are you going to use to determine, to write your SLTs? Fourthly, set the growth target and scoring plan. So after you have defined the content, what you want your kids to know, you look at what you want them to, how are you going to collect that? What are you going to use what type of assessment are you going to use to see where they are? And then you're going to identify what you're going to give each one of those groups. Say you have an English 2 class and an English 3 class. You may give an English 2 pre-assessment that's aligned with LEAP 2025. You might give an English 3 assessment that's aligned with ACT. It's completely up to you, but what are you going to use? How are you going to identify those groups that you're going to test? And then how are you going to look at that data and set a growth target for those kids throughout the year? So they scored a 20 on your pre-assessment. How do you get them to reach that 90? How do you get them to reach that 80? What type of goal that's reasonable but attainable are you going to set for your students, and then create a scoring plan for each one of those groups? So let's dive right into the first one. We're going to go step by step on each one of these to see which one, to kind of identify what you need to look at in each area. So firstly, defining the content. Teachers should define the content that is most important for students to learn during their time in that particular class or course. Prioritizing content that is aligned to Common Core state standards whenever possible, and looking at national, state, and local standards to identify the content that students should learn by the end of class. So you're going to use that to determine what type of content you want to have for your students. An English 2 student doesn't have the same content that an English 3 student has. Your AP courses are going to require content that comes directly from the AP provider. Those classes are going to, every class is going to have something different. All right. So when you're teaching different courses, you're teaching different classes, or you're teaching different grades, you should have content that is aligned with each one of those, and you should have a plan from the state or some type of pacing guide that tells you where you need to go with these students, what they need to master, what type of standards they need to master in each grade, and you're helping them reach those. So you're looking at that content and seeing, where do I want my kids to go from here? Once you have that content, then you can give your pretest. So your pretest should be used for SLT data. Pretest should be administered within the first 3 to 4 weeks of school. We typically give a little longer in high school because you're going to constantly have classes switching. That's another thing they don't teach you in your teacher preparation program. You may have a list of students, and you got those students at the beginning of the year, and you think that those students are going to be in your class the whole year. You set out your first year teacher, you had your seating chart, you've set up everyone's grade, you created these cute little folders for everyone, and the first weekend, you've lost 5 kids. It happens. All right. So those kids are going to constantly be switched out as counselors see that they need another class to graduate, or that they're missing a class, or that they've already taken your class and someone just missed the mark. All right. You have to try to be mindful of that. That's why you give a little more leniency with those diagnostic exams and with those pre-assessments in high school. So the first 3 to 4 weeks of school, you should have given all your kids a pre-assessment before you really dive deep into the curriculum. All right, pretest for data for subgroups should be excluded from main data. All right, so when you are doing your pretest and you're looking at the data that you've collected, you'll have those subgroups that you're going to pull out, and we'll discuss subgroups a little more later. But those subgroups data should be pulled away from your main data. So if you are doing ESS as a subgroup, your main group is going to be the kids that are not ESS. So that will be all of your other students besides those ESS kids. That data from ESS should be pulled from the main data, and those should be 2 different groups now. So you should have your data from your main group and your data from your ESS students, and you'll use that to drive your instruction and write your SLTs. Next, step 2. So you're going to identify the assessment and collect baseline data. After you've given, Step 2, identify the assessment and collect baseline data. After you have defined the content, you're going to identify the assessment that you're going to give, or the pretest, like I just said. Your pre-assessment, and you're going to make sure that it's appropriate to measure students' mastery of the identified content. You can look at the LDOE Common Assessment List. You can also look at your schools, speak to your administrators, see what was given in that class, and you guys can work collaboratively at the school and the district level to see what type of assessment you can give. Now, in those core classes, you will have an assessment that you can give for that class through the state. So you have certain pre-assessments that have already been created with this content, with the standards, with everything aligned for that course. However, for my elective teachers, you may not have a standard assessment for your course. You can get with your school, see what the goals are for the class. What do they want out of the class? It may be a jumpstart class where they want you to test those kids in customer service prior and use that customer service data to drive your SLTs. See what exactly your school or your district wants, and then you can create an assessment or use an assessment that's already been created to give to your students and collect that baseline data for them. Next, you're going to identify the student group. SLTs may be set for an entire class of students, multiple sections of the same course, smaller groups such as low-performing students, ELL, ESL, any of those groups may be subgroups for your SLTs. So teachers should try to address the majority of their students across 2 or more SLTs, and teachers should prioritize content areas aligned to Common Core. So while we want you to make sure that you should have 2 groups, you may say, I want to really look at my ESL students. I really want to see their progress separately from my main group. It's completely okay to have more than one subgroup with your SLTs. So what are subgroups? Your subgroups are going to be the smaller group of students. So you have your main group, that should be the majority of your students, and that would probably be regular education students for those that are in regular education. However, your subgroup, because you will have inclusion students in most classes, you might say that you have your ESS population that you want to use as a subgroup. You might have your ESL population that you want to use as a subgroup. They can also be categorized by gender, class period, socioeconomic level. All of that can be identified in your SLTs as a subgroup. Now, you may exclude groups as long as you are including the majority of your students. So you can say, I only have 2 ELL kids. I don't want to include them in my data because I want to do them separately or look at it separately. I'm going to exclude this group. That's perfectly okay. As long as you still have the majority, about 80% of your students, you're fine with excluding that group particularly. All right. I did star gender and socioeconomic level because those can be sensitive subjects. So in the world today, of course, many of you know we have transgender, we have gender neutral, we have people who don't identify with the gender. Please pay attention to that with your students, because you cannot legally ask them, what are you going to, what do you want me to list you as? However, you can exclude that subgroup, or you can say, I'm just going to exclude gender altogether and I'm going to choose another subgroup. That's fine. All right. But be mindful of that. Some students may not identify as male or female, and you want to be mindful. Also, socioeconomic level. How are you determining these kids' socioeconomic level? You collecting W-2s? Are you, looking at pay stubs? What are you doing? So we have to be mindful of that as well. How are we looking at these children and identifying where they actually land? So those 2 subgroups I've always steered clear of. It's completely up to you on whether or not you want to include those subgroups or where you want to actually look at those. So just be mindful of that with subgroups. So here are some examples of what subgroups can look like. You can have subgroups according to with 1 or 2 groups, or you can have 3 groups, you can have 4 groups, you can have whatever you want. So say you have a main group, you can have your main group, and then you can have a subgroup of ESLs, and then you can have another subgroup of ESS students. You can, if you teach different subjects, you can say your English 2 class is your large group, that's your main group, and your subgroup is your English 1 students. You can also do it by course title. So if you're teaching advanced career readiness and a basic career readiness, those can be your 2 different groups as well. Whichever group is your large group is your main group, and your smaller group is your subgroup, of course. So looking at the last one, looking at setting your growth target and scoring plan. Now, your growth target and scoring plan, you want to be able to look at that and set the expectation for student growth. Make sure your goal is ambitious, but it's still attainable for your students. So you want to kind of look at that data, the data you've had that you collected in the beginning from your pre-assessment. Look at that baseline data. See where your students are. What kind of goals are you going to set that they can actually attain? So for some students, the goal may be a little higher if they scored a certain thing on your test. For others, it may be a little lower, but it's still attainable. Everyone's not going to score an excellent on the LEAP 2025 or the EOC test. However, some of them may score a good. You want to be able to look at that data and set those goals that are attainable. Looking at the bottom, it's going to show you what an insufficient target looks like, a partial target, a full attainment target, and an exceptional target. So that's going to whatever you have that exceeds that goal. Now let's look at an SLT. Let's look at a writing example. So this is a sample growth target for an English 2 class. This is what the teacher wrote. I decided to develop a pretest based on English 2 items from Eagle to determine how many of my students are starting the year at grade level. When I gave this test, 52 of 90, which is 58%, got at least half the questions right. Students need to get 60% of the items right to earn a score of good. So all of these students should be able to score a good or excellent. So this teacher used the data that they received from the pretest to write a goal that is a bit of a stretch with it being excellent, but also being attainable. So you have those kids that scored well, that did the best on his test, in a separate group from the students who did okay and from the students who did not as great. So you see the 3 different groups here, and he said what those students should be able to attain based on looking at that data. So his overall goal for his student learning target is, at my school last year, classrooms with similar baseline data had approximately 65% of the students score good or excellent. Given this data, I am setting a goal that 70% of students, 63 out of 90, will score good or excellent on an English 2 EOC. So he set that goal for his class based on the information that he had gotten. Now, this is for his main group. His subgroup may be a smaller percentage of students. So he can still use the same rationale. He can still use the same statement, but of course he's going to put that down use that data that he had to draw that conclusion and write that down according to the number of students he had and what percentage of those students were in that group. So based on his data, this is his scoring plan. This is his plan for his EOC students, and this is them scoring a good or an excellent. So if 49 of those students out of 90 score fewer than good or excellent, then he did not reach his range. If 50 to 62 of those students score good or exceptional or excellent, he reaches a partial attainment. If 63 of 76, then he reached his goal. He has full attainment that those kids got a good or excellent on their EOC test. And if he exceeds the goal, that would mean that 77 or more students scored a good or excellent on the EOC. So quickly, what we're going to do a quick little activity based on the student learning target for our course. So read the SLT here and tell me what you think. I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to read that, and you can tell me what you think of this SLT. All right, so you should have rated this from 1 to 5. 5 to 5 is something that I use for my classes when I was teaching, and it's just a quick way to survey the class, to evaluate what's going on, and to analyze student understanding. So it can be used as a quick formative assessment. 1, meaning I do not understand it all. 2, meaning I understand a little bit. 3, I understand some, but I need some help. 4, meaning I understand fully, and 5, meaning I understand and I can teach someone. You can also use this to rate 1 through 5 on whether or not you think something is good or bad, and kind of giving it a rating. So with this one, how did you rate it? For me, I would have given this one a 1 or a 2. So, let me tell you why. So I'm looking at it. Number one, 30 out of 50 is not 75%. So to look at that and say that's completely wrong. So that can't be 75% of the students. It's actually about 60% of the students. So of those students, which will reach the goal by the end of the school year. What goal? All right. What goal are the students reaching? Is this your main group of students? Is this a subgroup of students? Those students aren't being identified. And by the end of the school year, what type of assessment are you giving them? What is the goal of that assessment? Do you want them to score good or excellent? Do you want them to attain 90% of the knowledge or 80%? What is your goal? What is your rationale? What type of, what are you using to assess these kids? What is the baseline behind this, the content that you're trying to get them to attain? So if I were to change this SLT, I would have written it 30 out of 50 of my students will score a good or excellent on the English 2 EOC at the end of the 2020-2021 school year. All right. I would have changed it to at least that, and you can add more in if you'd like, but please remember that your target should only be about one to two sentences, no longer. So it should not be super complex. It should not be your rationale. Your rationale should have been listed before then with your baseline data, with your content, and your reason for saying that the students will reach that goal. So you should have listed that prior, and this is your target for your students based on that. All right, we're going to do another one real quickly. So go ahead and read over this one. Give me a fist of 5 on this, on where you think it should be. All right. So with that, I love playing music when I was teaching because it kind of kept the students like, oh God, it's coming to an end. You know, once you play the song, even a Jeopardy song, at some point, they kind of know like, okay, I don't have time to play around because she's timing this. I also use timers in my classroom. I use that to kind of keep kids on track. So all those things can help with pacing, and they can help with your students just creating an atmosphere where your students know your policies and your procedures. One of the biggest things with being able to have effective instruction is actually having a class that is structured to where your students know policy and procedure, and they know what to expect when they're coming into your classroom. All right, so reading this one, 10 of 50 or 10% of students will attain a level 1 certification by the end of the school year by successfully completing the department exam administered by the National Retail Federation. All right, so how did you rate this one? For me, I would give this one a 4. This is a really strong target. If I were looking, this is really, really strong. If I were looking at, the baseline data, it aligned well. I would change the percentage because that is wrong again. And I would look at this and say that's a really strong one for someone to have. This one, of course, works with an elective course, or you can also have it in your course if you're using a certain exam, your ACT, whatever your goals are. What do you want those kids to score on your ACT? Are you saying that a certain level, a certain number of them will score a 16 to a 20 or score a 20 to a 25? What are you doing, and who administers the test that you are giving them? So I would score this one as a 4. I would change the percentage, maybe change some of the verbiage. But other than that, it's a strong SLT. It's way better than the first one. But we're missing so many important elements and so many important details that really make a difference. I will add the attendance clause and say, that attend my class 80% of the time, because I want to really pull out those kids at the end who missed. In an elementary setting, you may not have as many absences as a high school setting. Absenteeism is a huge problem in some of our schools. And it's not fair to teachers to have to use the data from a kid that's missed 5 days each month or 10 days each month in our SLTs. So add that attendance clause into the bottom to say, I want to only include the kids who attended my class to actually retain the content knowledge that I was giving them, that we discussed, that we went over. So write some SLTs. Let's write. Take a second. Look at your subject. Think about your subject. Think about your course, what you're teaching or courses, and write your target. Write out a quick target on what you think is a good target for your students. Where would you start? It doesn't have to be perfect, but think about where would you start? What would it look like? So keep in mind that you are writing and you're thinking about what a goal that is attainable, but you still want it to be a bit of a challenge for your students. You don't want to write a goal that's too easy. You want something that's going to be a stretch, but make sure you're using that data to drive your targets. Don't just write down things that you want for your students, but write down things that the data really shows you they can attain or they can exceed. All right? Don't put a cap on the students. Let them know that you think that they can receive this, and share your SLTs with your students. Let them know what your goals are. All right. So moving right along. What did you write? Are those goals attainable? Were they a challenge for your students? Do you need to go back and revise them mid-year? Because SLTs are supposed to be revised mid-year. For some people that are on a block schedule, it's going to look around October when you want to look at those SLTs, see where it's going, revise those SLTs. For some people, your range may be around December or January because you have those kids all year long, especially those that are on an A-B schedule. What does that look like? What have you learned about your students? Are you going to bump that goal up? Can those kids reach another level? Have you guys progressed really, really well to where you're going to strive for more with them? Really take the time mid-year to assess the goals that you've written for your students so that you can get the most of your SLTs and those students can get the most out of your course. All right? So let's review. The concepts we went over today: measurable data. Data should always be measurable and include a passing percentage of competency of 60%. That's what I said for myself every time I did something. That was the minimum for me. All right. Someone else may be different based on the type of students, and that's why I write extenuating circumstances. Your pretest data should be from pretest and have that baseline data to be included in your SLTs. This information should drive your instruction. Whatever the goal is for your class, whether that is a good or excellent on a EOC, whether that is reaching another level on ACT where they're getting a 25, 24s and above, we reaching for that 36. All right. You should let that drive your instruction. Make sure that your instructional strategies and your teaching matches your goals. Let that exceed your goals. All right. Your standards should be included in your SLTs, whether Common Core, district, state, whatever your standards are, they should be included. And your subgroups should be at least one SLT and can include ESS, ESL, single class, gender, whole group, all of that. These do not need to exceed the 60% because they are situation-based. Now, if you have an AP class and you say, hey, I want to say that 80% of my AP students are going to score a 3 or 4 on the AP exam, that's fine. So you have that exceeding of the 60%, but please don't think that you have to have that when you have level 1 ESL students who came in and who cannot speak the language. Be compassionate. Show compassion in your SLTs and with your students to where you're understanding of their situations and your understanding of their circumstances, but you are still setting goals for them that can show growth and progress while they're in your class. So that's all I have for you. My resources were LouisianaBelieves.com, EBRschools.org, and Next Gen Science. I got some stuff off there as well. If you guys have any questions, you can email me anytime. My email address is jhooker@ebrschools.org, and I'll also include that somewhere where my slide is posted so that you'll know who I am, because it's going to say Jaleesa Jones instead of Jaleesa Hooker Jones in my email address, but that's still me. All right. So you guys have an excellent day. If you have any questions, contact me, reach out. I am more than happy to help you, and come back for part 2 of my series on what your teacher preparation program didn't tell you. We're going to dive into so many different topics that are not discussed during teacher preparation programs. And then sometimes new teachers come in and say, where did that come from? Nobody told me I had to do that. Nobody told me that was a factor. That's fine. I'm going to address them here. I'm going to be able to help you here, and we're going to move forward together so that you know exactly what you can expect your first year, second year of teaching, and you'll be on track. All right. So come back, see me again next week. I'm not sure what the topic is going to be next week, but I have a long list. So we'll look at discipline, assessments, all type of things. Have a good one again. See you soon.